So on my part for animating Eric, I decided to use motion capture, just using one connect with VFX Motion Capture Studio. So what I'm doing here is I'm just setting up the device just as a run through for the opening credits, just to show you kind of the stages that I used to be able to capture motion for the character. So I've decided to choose 320 by 240 as the video mode and 30 Hz, just really for the recording. That's just the main thing. So basically what you're seeing here is depth data, just showing the different colours just to show how far away the person actually is in the scene. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of working out what the best possible amount of space is that I can get to get the most walk out of the cycle. And here I'm just elevating the angle of the connect, so rather than actually forcing the connect into a different position, you just kind of move the slider, and what it does is it just nudges the connect up and down, so you get the perfect angle. Usually what I do is I actually have the connect about 6 foot raised up, and it kind of makes for better tracking, but the situation I've just used standard tripods and just place the connect on top. So basically here what I need to do is I just need to basically evaluate the background, and what that is just making a capture of what the background looks like, the scene or the volume looks like, and what that does is it basically takes that out of the recording itself, which leaves only the data for the actor that's in the scene. And now I'm just ready to start the motion capture. So really all it is, it's just the actor walks into the center of the volume, starts in a standard T pose, and then starts the motion. The reason for the T pose is just basically so that when it comes to connecting up the animation to the character later on, that it actually merges properly. You'll see that later. So it's best to always start with a T-pose and end with a T-pose, just to start and end the sequence. At the same time, it's best to always keep your joints out from each other, so although it looks quite cartoony in the sense that you're overemphasizing your motions, it makes for better tracking, and although it's not an actual human motion, it fits the character more. And as the character Eric has quite a large head, obviously he wiggles from side to side, so it is trying to mimic that motion bit in a cartoon-like style. So now the motion's ready to be transferred into iPySoft, and you'll be able to track it out. So the main thing to remember when using iPySoft Motion Capture Studio is to run with the graphics processor, the NVIDIA graphics processor. The reason being is that it actually makes the trackings go a lot faster because it runs off the graphics card as opposed to running off of the motherboard, and that's the only way that you can actually do it, is from the desktop on this laptop. The reason being is that I've had to set that up independently. So if I go in here and I open a new project, now there's a difference between opening project, which is a previously saved project, and new project, which is the opening the actual recording that you've done. So if I'll go ahead and open up this recording, which should be beach scene 1, which is one that we've done quite a lot. of work on. Now, I never usually, what I do is this recording was recorded quite a while back, on the 6th of December. What I usually do is, when it comes to selecting the character size, I don't really bother to start off with. The reason being is that the character size can always differentiate when it comes to the actor themselves, depending on whether the camera's up high or if it's down low or if it's kind of about centre, and depending on how close the person is to the camera. So what I usually do is I edit that after I've set up the T-pose that I like. So if I get rid of the bones there, what we'll be left with is, we're now left with videos, and what we'll also have in a second is some depth data, which I'll just pause there. Basically what's happening there is the connector is picking up all of these individual points, which is cloud point data, and what it does is it creates a relatively good base point for me to be able to start tracking out. So really what it's about is just kind of about playing through and finding out the scenes. So what I usually do is I kind of move up to each of the markers just to say, okay, well that right there is a take, because I've started off with a T-pose here, and this is a second take because I've finished off with a T-pose at the end of the first take, sorry. And then what really it's about is just kind of finding those poses, and if I just select add a new take and just swipe it across, and what happens is this actually snaps. So I run it out until I find another T-pose, and so we actually have, so if we now add another take and just bring this across here and just let it snap, there we go. So I can actually bring that out to here because there's nothing in that gap there, and jumps across, so it actually fell over there, and if we add in another take here, okay, so take 4 was actually the take that we used for the original scene. So what I'll do is I'll set that up so that we can track that out. So we go up to actor, and we show the bones and we show the skin. So now we know that the actor obviously isn't in the correct space, so it's really just about moving him until he's kind of in about the right area, and we know that it's kind of round about there. Doesn't have to be absolutely exact. So the character shape, nudge that up just a little bit, and then go into tracking. What I usually do is I enable head tracking anyway, just to make sure that it tracks that out. So first of all, it's to refit the pose, and what that does is it just makes sure that it aligns all of the parts of the character with the cloud point data that's there. And from here I'll track forward, and what I'll do is I'll just speed up just so that you can start from the next point. So now that I know that footage has been tracked out, what I can then do is I can actually view it, and I know straight off that in the last frame there's actually a problem with the tracking. And what's probably happened is there's been a bit of occlusion at some point on these parts here, which means that this hasn't been able to join on, but that's okay because I can easily fix that over time by using parts of the software. So what I'll do is I'll just take the video off, and I'll leave the actual cloud point on as well, which can show you the character moving about. Now it's obviously it's quite slow, probably through the recording, but basically what's happening, there's quite a lot of jiggle down here on the arms and on the legs. It kind of floats off the ground, it's not really doing what it's meant to be doing as such. But what I'll do before I go any further is I'll just fix this frame here. So I'll go up to the last frame, and I'm just going to pull this into right here. It snaps kind of a bit further, yeah. So it snaps about there. And what I'll do is I'll just track backwards after let's reset this. So it's really just about moving the joint into the position that it really should have been in the first place, refitting the pose on the character, and then basically just track backwards from that point. And what will happen is during that time it'll lose tracking again, but what's happened is because I've tracked backwards, it means there's a smaller amount of frames that I'll actually have to fix. So I'll just fast forward once this is okay. So tracking of that pose didn't actually come up with any other problems through the rest of it. The joint is fixed now. So basically what I'll do is I'll just bring this back down here, and now that we no longer need the depth data, there's no point in having it on. So if I just play this through quickly, there's quite a lot of foot sliding down the bottom here. The foot kind of shakes quite a lot. Parts of the joints aren't actually really given all that much in the sense of stability. So from this point onwards now, really what it's about is it's just about cleaning up the track that you have. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to refine backward from the last frame first of all. After that I need to apply some jitter removal, refine backward again, and apply a final round of jitter removal. And what that'll do is that will clear up the actor. So what I'll do is at each stage I'll pause and just kind of let you show a quick preview of each stage and the difference. So I'll refine backward and I'll fast forward. So now that that's actually finished, we'll go ahead and play that again just to show. Now there's a little bit of difference and it is a little bit cleaner. Basically what this does is it takes out quite a bit of the animation where it isn't as smooth, and what it does is it smooths it up. Because that's now finished, what I need to next do is I need to apply some jitter removal. What that does is that should remove some of the jitter from places like the feet, the legs, the hands, the arms. The head can be quite a nightmare sometimes. But in the first pass what I do is I set everything to 2, click OK, make sure I'm on the first frame, and I then hit apply, and what I'll do is I'll fast forward and I'll give another preview. Now that that's now finished, you'll find that the feet and sliding is a lot better and a lot smoother, but generally what I need to do is I need to do just another pass. The reason being is that there's still a bit of sliding on the feet, especially a bit of bobbing there, and round here where the arms are there's a little bit of movement. So what I do is make sure to again go to the last frame and find backwards. So at this point the animation is going to be a lot smoother now, and there's still a little bit of jitter in the bottom of the feet, a little bit of sliding and a little bit of jitter here. So what I do is I drop these down to 1 just to give them another quick clean up, and what this does here is actually create it works out the midpoint between each keyframe and sets a smoother motion in terms of jitter removal. And what I'll do is I'll apply this from the first frame again, and after that it should be good to go. Now that motion's actually tracked out, it's looking pretty good. There isn't as much slide. There's still a little bit of foot slide and there's still a little bit of bobbing here, but it should be good for at least taking into. So what I do is I recenter the coordinate system on the character in the first frame. The reason being is that generally what happens is you're never in the centre. It's just nice to have the characters start straight from the centre, which means if you're placing it into any scenes, he's always going to be in the same place each time. And what we do is we export the animation from Motion Builder, and what I like to do is I actually like to save both the BVH and the FBX file. Just means I've got a bit more option, a bit more scope when it comes to actually doing things. So what I'll do is I'll just save it into here, and we will call it beach scene. information again into an FBX, and it's each scene. So that's now ready to actually be opened in Motion Builder and placed onto a rigged character. But what I'll do is I'll open up Monika's model of Eric and I'll rig him up so that he's then ready for motion capture. So by this point Monika would have sent me the model so that I could start rigging Eric up, and if I just go into the original model and I'll just open up the final one that I have, this one's already been rigged up at the moment. So if I just unbind this, okay, so basically what we have here is we have Eric's model, and for Monika to create the model, what she needs to do is she needs to, for the purposes of motion capture, have all the joints at the 0 rotation. And basically what that means is it's just that the joints don't have any rotation in them at all, so the thumb's not sticking up or anything like that, and this is a standard pose for motion capture. And what I've done here is I actually created a human IK character and just selected create a skeleton, and what it does is it creates a basic skeleton. What you do is you just kind of move the joints and fit them into position of the character. You start off by just kind of moving that into there and finding the points. Along the character's center points. So it's really just about getting those lined up. Once those are actually lined up, you move certain specific joints so that you can get them into place. So once those are all in place, what you would do is you would select both the bones and you'd select the skeleton, and you'd go in and you'd bind the pose, and what you do is you select smooth bind. Now for this I used a drop off rate of 9, so what that basically means is that in the joint hierarchy it's going to bind this mesh here to whichever joint it finds to be the closest. What happens sometimes is once you actually bind the mesh to the bones, it's actually picking up places that are actually closer to it that it shouldn't really be. So it should this section here should actually be attached to here. So the drop off rate I selected was 9, and if I just reopen this file, this is actually a bound skeleton here. So if I was just to come in here and I was just to move this, what that does is it just means that the skeleton's actually bound to the skin, so that now anytime that this bone or any other bone in Eric is moved, it's going to move the mesh that's actually attached to it. It's going to move that skin that's attached to it. Now there's deformations here, and that's normal. Because what happens is it's just the way that it's set up, and it doesn't realise that maybe these parts are actually more supposed to be attached to here, or they're actually supposed to be more attached to the spine. So generally what happens is, as explained earlier, usually what happens is this cheek here actually binds to this skeleton, this part of the skeleton here, and what it does is it draws out this section and tries to attach it to here, so when the head rotates you get this big massive streak of cheek. So what I would do is I would come in and I would select the vertex tool, and I would select each individual point that's up along here, and I would reassign those to this head joint that's actually inside this model rather than them being attached to the arm joints, and that managed to fix that no problem. Once the model was fully rigged, what I then needed to do to send that to Motion Builder, and in my workflow what I do is I send the scenes back and forward between each other. So now Eric's been imported into the scene. You can see that it doesn't have any mesh on him. There's no colour, there's no texture on him at all. It's just the basic standard model and the bones that were attached to the skin as well. The first thing that I need to do is I need to come in, and this character down here is actually what this whole model is relating to. So if I turn on X-ray and I hold spacebar and right click, what I can now do is I'm now attached to the entirety of this skeleton and everything about it. And every skeleton joint has its own name, and the name listings for Maya are different than what they are for Motion Builder, just slightly, but it's just the way that the naming conventions are. So this character 1 is in relation to the naming conventions for Maya, so I have to delete this. And then once I've deleted that, I then have to select a new character and drag this over onto any point, any part of the skeleton at all. It doesn't really matter where it is, but I need to drag that character over onto here, and I need to characterize it, and I need to give it a new naming convention, which is the Motion Builder naming convention. So I select biped because it's just he's just got 2 legs there. Once I know that that's the right naming convention and that's been named correctly, that I know that that's for Eric, what I then do is I just go and import the motion file itself. And what I usually do is I just work from the FBX files. Like, I find them a lot easier to work with. It's a lot easier to drag the skeletons, so I just import them and I just create a new skeleton. And what happens is I then import that animation that I tracked out earlier, and that animation's there for me to now connect up to Eric. But before I do that, what I need to do is I need to characterize this skeleton here. The reason being is that basically these joints all here should relate to the same joints that are on this character, and what happens is the information that's held in each of these different joints is then transferred into the information that's in these joints, and it drives that information forward. And that's why you always have to start on a T-pose when it comes to motion captures, so that all the rotations are the exact same as each other from the starting point. And it means that if you ever transfer any information across, you always do it on the first frame, because if you start here, then what happens is it transfers that information from that frame onto the first frame of this one, and it completely wrecks the character. So what I do is I come in here and I just double check that I've got the BVH reference, and I just drag on the character and characterize that model so it now has the same references. And if I rename that to MoCap, just so that I can differentiate between the two. So if I double click on Eric, what I then find is the input types, and the input type, because I've selected this and I've characterized this model, it appears under characterized for MoCap. What I need to do is I need to select character and then activate that. If you've seen the model just jump forward slightly there, what that means is that the information has been transferred onto the character. Now that that information has been transferred on the character, what I usually do is I just go in and I just change a few settings. So I just need to match the source so that it gives it kind of the exact same style of movement, and that's under retargeting. I then go into actor and I select the human select limits, and I go down to modifiers, and I go down to floor contacts here and select feet floor contact. And the reason being is that sometimes it dips underneath the floor, and if I can try and stop that here, then it's better than having to try and stop it later in some graph editor. So if I now play that, it's more exact to what the actual character does in terms of the motion capture. So now that that's been done, all I need to do now is I need to plot the character, and what that means is that I'm baking the animation to the skeleton here. So I'm transferring the information from here, or I'm copying the information from here onto here. And I select skeleton. I don't need to select control rig because there's no control rig for the character. Select skeleton, and I select usually gimbal killer, because that means that I can then do a bit of I can do a bit of keyframing over the top at a later date. So now that that's been done, what I can do is I can just set that to normal, and I can hide the skeletons so that we can see how that looks. So the model looks fairly good. and is almost ready for exporting. Usually what I would do at this point is I would go in and I would edit a few of the frames, and I would maybe add a bit of keyframing on top of there. And generally how I would do that is I would just come in and set on a new animation layer. I would have a look at I would have a look again at this model here, and I would reset it. I'd reset it to a control rig, and what that means is I can then edit on top of that animation. So once I've sent that back into Maya, what happens is it asks me to unlock the character set. The reason being is that the character set's usually locked because it comes out of the human IK. So you unlock it, and what it does is it just allows it to change the information on the bones. So that character is now actually in here. So basically now that character is ready to be passed across. However, what I have done is that I've painted the weights on the skin. I'll just go over quickly what that is, the weights on the skin. I just select Eric and so basically each joint has its own information on how much it's driven. The skin has its own information on how much it's deformed by the joint that is closest to it, and basically what you do is you go across each of the joints painting the weights back onto the skin, using these functions like smooth and add and scale, and what that does is it just reassigns the information back to the bones that it's supposed to, and it wipes it from the previous bones, and it helps so any deformations that you do have in the skin based on animation, generally that's where that comes from, and that's how that's fixed. And now that that's done, what I would then do is I would then save that scene, and I would then pass that on to Kevin, who would start compositing the scenes and getting them ready and setting them